Israel, 142, and they argue that the language of anti-Zionism and criticism of Israel are used to attack Jews more broadly. In this view, the proponents of the new concept believe that criticisms of Israel and Zionism are often disproportionate in degree and unique in kind, and they attribute this to antisemitism. 143. Jewish scholar Gustavo Putnik posited in 2004 that anti-Zionism in itself represents a form of discrimination against Jews, in that it singles out Jewish national aspirations as an illegitimate and racist endeavor, and proposes actions that would result in the death of millions of Jews. 143. It is asserted that new antisemitism deploys traditional antisemitic motifs, including older motifs such as the blood libel. 142. A sign held at a protest in Edinburgh, Scotland, January 2009. Critics of the concept view it as trivializing the meaning of antisemitism, and as exploiting antisemitism in order to silence the debate and to deflect attention from legitimate criticism of the State of Israel, and, by associating anti-Zionism with antisemitism, misusing it to taint anyone opposed to Israeli actions and policies. 144. History. The massacre of the Banu Qurayza, a Jewish tribe in Medina, 627. Many authors see the roots of modern antisemitism in both pagan antiquity and early Christianity. Jerome Chains identifies 6 stages in the historical development of antisemitism. Sad Smiley. 145. Pre-Christian anti-Judaism in ancient Greece and Rome, which was primarily ethnic in nature. Christian antisemitism in antiquity and the Middle Ages, which was religious in nature and has extended into modern times. Traditional Muslim antisemitism, which was at least, in its classical form, nuanced in that Jews were a protected class. Political, social and economic antisemitism of Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment Europe, which laid the groundwork for racial antisemitism. Racial antisemitism that arose in the 19th century and culminated in Nazism in the 20th century. Contemporary antisemitism, which has been labeled by some as the new antisemitism. Chains suggests that these 6 stages could be merged into 3 categories: ancient antisemitism, which was primarily ethnic in nature; Christian antisemitism, which was religious; and the racial antisemitism of the 19th and 20th centuries. 146. Ancient world. The first clear examples of anti-Jewish sentiment can be traced to the 3rd century BCE, to Alexandria, 90, the home to the largest Jewish diaspora community in the world at the time, and where the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, was produced. Manetho, an Egyptian priest and historian of that era, wrote scathingly of the Jews. His themes are repeated in the works of Chaeremon, Lysimachus Posidonius, Apollonius Molon, and in Appian and Tacitus. 147. Agap Archides of Cnidus ridiculed the practices of the Jews and the absurdity of their law, making a mocking reference to how Ptolemy Lagus was able to invade Jerusalem in 320 BCE because its inhabitants were observing the Shabbat. 147. One of earliest anti-Jewish edicts, promulgated by Antiochus IV Epiphanes in about 170–167 BCE, sparked a revolt of the Maccabees in Judy. 148, 238. In view of Manetho's anti-Jewish writings, antisemitism may have originated in Egypt and been spread by the Greek retelling of ancient Egyptian prejudices. 149. The ancient Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria describes an attack on Jews in Alexandria in 38 CE, in which thousands of Jews died. 150, 151. The violence in Alexandria may have been caused by the Jews being portrayed as misanthropes. 152. Chirikova argues that the reason for hatred of Jews in the Hellenistic period was their separateness in the Greek cities. The Police. 153. Bahak has argued, however, that early animosity against the Jews cannot be regarded as being anti-Judaic or anti-Semitic unless it arose from attitudes that were held against the Jews alone, and that many Greeks showed animosity toward any group they regarded as barbarians. 154. Statements exhibiting prejudice against Jews and their religion can be found in the works of many pagan Greek and Roman writers. 155. Edward Flannery writes that it was the Jews' refusal to accept Greek religious and social standards that marked them out. Hecataeus of Abdera, a Greek historian of the early 3rd century BCE, wrote that Moses, in remembrance of the exile of his people, instituted for them a misanthropic and inhospitable way of life. Menego, an Egyptian historian, wrote that the Jews re-expelled Egyptian lepers who had been taught by Moses not to adore the gods. Edward Flannery describes antisemitism in ancient times as essentially cultural, taking the shape of a national xenophobia played out in political settings. 90. There are examples of Hellenistic rulers desecrating the temple and banning Jewish religious practices such as circumcision, Shabbat observance, the study of Jewish religious books, etc. Examples may also be found in anti-Jewish riots in Alexandria in the 3rd century BCE. The Jewish diaspora on the Nile island Elephantine, which was founded by mercenaries, experienced the destruction of its temple in 410 BCE. 156. Relationships between the Jewish people and the occupying Roman Empire were at times antagonistic and resulted in several rebellions. According to Suetonius, the Emperor Tiberius expelled from Rome Jews who had gone to live there. The 18th century English historian Edward Gibbon identified a more tolerant period in Roman-Jewish relations beginning in about 160 CE. 90. However, when Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire, the state's attitude towards the Jews gradually worsened. James Carroll asserted, Jews accounted for 10% of the total population of the Roman Empire. By Petratio, if other factors such as pogroms and conversions had not intervened, there would be 200 million Jews in the world today, instead of something like 13 million. 157. Persecutions during the Middle Ages. In the late 6th century CE, the newly Catholicized Visigothic kingdom in Hispania issued a series of anti-Jewish edicts which forbade Jews from marrying Christians, practicing circumcision, and observing Jewish holy days. 158. Continuing throughout the 7th century, both Visigothic kings and the Church were active in creating social aggression and towards Jews with civic and ecclesiastic punishments. 159. Ranging between forced conversion, slavery, exile and death. 160. From the 9th century, the medieval Islamic world classified Jews and Christians as dhimmis and allowed Jews to practice their religion more freely than they could do in medieval Christian Europe. Under Islamic rule, there was a golden age of Jewish culture in Spain that lasted until at least the 11th century. 161. It ended when several Muslim pogroms against Jews took place on the Iberian Peninsula, including those that occurred in Cordoba in 1011 and in Granada in 1066. 162, 163, 164. Several decrees ordering the destruction of synagogues were also enacted in Egypt, Syria, Iraq and Yemen from the 11th century. In addition, Jews were forced to convert to Islam or face death in some parts of Yemen, Morocco and Baghdad several times between the 12th and 18th centuries. 165. The Almohads, who had taken control of the Almoravids Maribi and Andalusian territories by 1147, 166, were far more fundamentalist in outlook compared to their predecessors, and they treated the dhimmis harshly. Faced with the choice of either death or conversion, Many Jews and Christians emigrated. 167, 168, 169. Some, such as the family of Maimonides, fled east to more tolerant Muslim lands. 167, while some others went northward to settle in the growing Christian kingdoms. 167. Expulsions of Jews in Europe from 1100 to 1600. In medieval Europe, Jews were persecuted with blood libels, expulsions, forced conversions and massacres. These persecutions were often justified on religious grounds and reached a first peak during the Crusades. In 1096, hundreds or thousands of Jews were killed during First Crusade. 170. This was the first major outbreak of anti-Jewish violence in Christian Europe outside Spain and was cited by Zionists in the 19th century as indicating the need for a state of Israel. 171. In 1147, there were several massacres of Jews during the Second Crusade. The Shepherds' Crusades of 1251 and 1320 both involved attacks, as did the Rindfleisch massacres in 1298. Expulsions followed, such as the 1290 banishment of Jews from England, the expulsion of 100,000 Jews from France in 1394, 172, and the 1421 expulsion of thousands of Jews from Austria. Many of the expelled Jews fled to Poland. 173. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, a major contributor to the deepening of antisemitic sentiment and illegal action among the Christian populations was the popular preaching of the zealous Reform religious orders, the Franciscans, especially Bernardino of Felter, and Dominicans, especially Vincent Ferrer, who combed Europe and promoted antisemitism through their often fiery, emotional appeals. 174, as the Black Death epidemics devastated Europe in the mid-14th century, causing the death of a large part of the population, Jews were used as scapegoats. Rumors spread that they caused the disease by deliberately poisoning wells. Hundreds of Jewish communities were destroyed in numerous persecutions. Although Pope Clement VI tried to protect them by issuing two papal bulls in 1348, the first on the 6th of July and an additional one several months later, 900 Jews were burned alive in Strasbourg, where the plague had not yet affected the city. 175. Reformation. Martin Luther, an ecclesiastical reformer whose teachings inspired the Reformation, wrote antagonistically about Jews in his pamphlet on the Jews and their lies, written in 1543. He portrays the Jews in extremely harsh terms, excoriates them and provides detailed recommendations for a pogrom against them, calling for the permanent oppression and expulsion. At one point he writes, "We are at fault in not slaying them," a passage that, according to historian Paul Johnson, may be termed the first work of modern antisemitism and a giant step forward on the road to the Holocaust. 176, 17th century. During the mid to late 17th century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was devastated by several conflicts, in which the Commonwealth lost over a third of its population, over 3 million people, and Jewish losses were counted in the hundreds of thousands. The first of these conflicts was the Khmelnytsky Uprising, when Bohdan Khmelnytsky's supporters massacred tens of thousands of Jews in the eastern and echelon of the expulsion of the Jews from Frankfurt in 1614 southern areas he controlled, today's Ukraine. The precise number of dead may never be known, but the decrease of the Jewish population during that period is estimated at 100,000 to 200,000, which also includes emigration, deaths from diseases, and captivity in the Ottoman Empire, called Jassy. 177, 178. European immigrants to the United States brought antisemitism to the country as early as the 17th century. Peter Stuyvesant, the Dutch governor of New Amsterdam, implemented plans to prevent Jews from settling in the city. During the colonial era, the American government limited the political and economic rights of Jews. It was not until the American Revolutionary War that Jews gained legal rights, including the right to vote.